Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades and compañeros, welcome back to the Moynihan Report. You know, sometimes we do these ones that there's a bit black in here around, very Charlie Rose-ish. Today, a very special one. It's different than Charlie Rose.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you, it's a
very
little different. Very
different.
The no-robe version of the Charlie Rose show.
Right.
Today, we're very lucky to have somebody that I have been pursuing for a while now. Mayor Bill de Blasio, thank you so much for joining us.
You're
and
welcome.
There's a lot to talk about. I actually, I wanted to talk about all that's going on in politics and everything today, but right before we started, you were telling me something. We were talking about our families.
Yeah.
You grew up in Cambridge. I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, very
Yeah.
close to each other. Italian background, Italian-Irish background, very typical Northeastern kind of lineage.
Yep.
And you mentioned that your father was a World War II generation guy who lost a leg or half a leg at Okinawa.
Correct.
But the interesting thing about that is that so many people were affected by the Second World War. You said that affected you.
Yeah, deeply.
How so?
Well, first of all, we can all think about history and the meaning of what's happening around us, but when it comes home to your family, when it's very, very personal, it changes your whole understanding of the world. So a guy who worked with veterans said to me years later, he said, World War II never ended for your family. Mm-hmm. Because my dad came back missing half a leg. He had been very athletic, good-looking guy, successful guy, but he never was quite the same after because he felt he wasn't whole. And that affected him physically. He was often in pain. There was shrapnel still in his remaining leg for the rest of his life, and he felt pain from that. But he also was emotionally really, really pained. It was PTSD, but before they knew how to talk about it and act on it.
Shell shock.
And of course, that generation. So it's strange because, my parents were both 44 when they had me. So it's almost like we added a generation or skipped a generation, whichever way you want to say it. So, they didn't know how to talk about it, which affected my perception of how to address mental health years later.
Yeah.
There was all sorts of macho pride about I don't need help, but in fact he did. A guy, incredibly impressive guy, heroic guy, highly decorated, captain in the U.S. Army, helped save the lives of many of the men who served under him. But when he came back, it was never the same. And he ultimately became alcoholic and struggled for particularly the last decade of his life. So that's what I saw when I was the last child.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I saw this guy who had been heroic in painful decline. It affected my understanding of mental health. It affected my understanding of substance abuse. It affected my understanding of family.
Yeah.
But also just, war. I mean, I have been...
Say, what about politics in that sense that I have had this revelation later in life is that unless you're Nick Fuentes, these neo-Nazi types, or these, the horseshoe of the extremes, I don't have time to be angry at you because I realized later in life how much people's personal backgrounds affect their politics, things that happen to them in life. It's not as if it's this tabula rasa, we're all given the same materials and we all come to different conclusions. Yeah. It's our life creates those conclusions in so many ways. And for you in your politics, radical phases, progressive phases, probably more centrist phases. I don't think you ever had a right-wing phase.
I did not.
Okay, you did not. But how much of that family background, what happened to your father, which is, fighting, in the American army in Japan, how much did that affect your politics? Do you think it did?
Deeply, deeply. There's a family story which even frames it more, that he was a young, idealistic guy and was college age during the Spanish Civil War and actually tried to go volunteer to join the Abraham Lincoln Brigades to fight fascism.
Yeah.
So
he was a left-wing guy himself?
No, I wouldn't call him left-wing. I would call him, not at all. I would call him liberal, New Deal Democrat.
Okay.
But you have to understand, and this affects me to this day, my understanding of the world, I was steeped in the whole sense of anti-fascism, anti-Nazism. Yeah. My mom worked for the Office of War Information during World War II because of her. She was an Italian immigrant family member, and so she spoke fluent Italian, and she worked with them on broadcast to Italy when it was under fascism and Nazism. So the point is, from the very beginning of my consciousness, the world was about fighting fascism. Mm-hmm. And I never had the impression that that ended in 1945. So that was a very big political imprint. But then the idea around what war meant. I mean, to the extent we can say that World War II was the good war, And you can argue all the issues of how we got to that point and what could have been done to stop it from ever
Very
happening.
big argument on the right now of people trying to make it the bad war,
Well,
which is pretty
and
shocking to me.
it is shocking, but there is also an important, and I would say maybe more of a left discussion of what might have been done, including in Spain during the Civil War, to stop Hitler and Mussolini from ever being so empowered. But the point I'm making is, I understood war very personally, and I understood its destructive impact on families. And it doesn't mean there isn't some context sometimes for military action. But for me, also coming up during the Vietnam era, when I first came to consciousness, my oldest brother was Vietnam draft age. I understood from the very beginning what war does to people and how much it should be avoided, especially when it involves American intervention in another country where we overwhelmingly, almost always don't belong. So that affected me. All of it. I think it gave me an anger, honestly, a rage to see the effect on such a good man of such a seismic event.
But that directing that anger, I mean, you're obviously not directing that at what strangely is now called the Department of War again, but the Department of War in D.C. in 1941-42, because that is a justifiable response to an attack by the Japanese, who's an imperial power committing genocide in China and the rape of Nanking, et cetera. But so how does that affect the way you think of kind of foreign policy, which really kind of dominates your life when it comes to politics in the early age, right? I mean, it's all about, not all, but there's a lot of it that's about foreign policy and about war. Yeah,
and it was, again, you're right, that we're all framed by our personal experience. So from my point of view, ironically, I have immense respect for my father's service. I have a personal sense of connection and appreciation to the U.S. Army for that reason. And I do think, there was a heroism in that generation that was real in fighting all forms of fascism, Nazism, imperialism. But let's face it, then I take those same values like so many other people forward and say, when you look at Vietnam, for example, how are we now the imperialists? How are we now the people creating pain and agony for another country?
What is that danger? And I think that maybe you disagree with me on this, but there is kind of always a danger when you're opposing, for instance, U.S. policy in Southeast Asia, U.S. policy in Central America, current U.S. policy in Venezuela, et cetera.
And Iraq,
obviously. And Iraq, and even Afghanistan, and Libya. I mean, there's a long list of this stuff where I tell people with, my fantastic experience in life that the one thing that you have to avoid is, because you don't like what we are doing, what the country that is representing you is doing, is to inhabit the body of the other, in the sense of like, America should not have been in Vietnam, but I don't know if we want to say Ho Chi Minh is going to win, or and this is personal for you because I know you've been criticized from it, and you've been very interesting about responding to that criticism of the Sandinistas. Is like, America should not be funding the Contras. They should not be involved in a civil war or helping to foment a civil war in Central America. But maybe don't back the Sandinistas. Don't be on the side of Maduro, but oppose America. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, there's a danger in that. And what is that kind of borderline where, because there is the pull. You just want to be, it's easier. You just want to be on our side. You want to root for one of the teams, right?
Yeah, but I would take another sports analogy and say you call them like you see them, right?
Yeah,
It's not about, it's not our place on one level to root either way.
Sure.
So when I think about all these examples, you sort of, whether it's ideal or not, you start with a negative. Mussolini and Hitler did not belong in Spain. There had been I'm going back to the Spanish Civil War, just to use that frame. There had been elections, left-wing government won. Stopping that imperialist action to hurt a democratically elected government, that one's easy to me. If it had been a more moderate Spanish government, it would have been equally true. And you go down the list. I agree with you. In Vietnam, you could have whatever view you want to have of what was happening within Vietnamese politics, but the central question was, why the hell were we there, and why were we causing so much pain to our own men and women in service, but also to the Vietnamese people?
I mean, 56,000 Americans died. That's incredible. Yeah,
it's stunning. But I look at the Nicaragua experience from a different lens. First of all, Jimmy Carter, who now has been reassessed, I think he did something seismic, world historic in keeping the United States out of Nicaragua at the time of the Sandinista revolution in 1979. That was a crucial turning point in the United States, sort of maturing away from constant negative intervention in the hemisphere that caused so many
either
horrible
directly or tacitly supporting the Somoza regime.
Right. I mean, the United States, unfortunately, and for whatever it's worth, my master's degree was in Latin American studies, and I love the United States of America. I'm a patriotic American, but when you look at the record in Latin America of supporting dictatorship after dictatorship after dictatorship and repressing popular movements, it's unfortunately painfully consistent. So Carter comes along in 1979 and says, we're not going to do that this time, which is stunning. The Sandinistas, to their great credit, originally talked about a third way. They were not going to replicate U.S. capitalism. They were not going to replicate Soviet communism. They were looking for something that was probably in the end kind of a social democracy, if you will. But look, to their great credit, they had elections. They won the first time, they lost the second time, and they turned over power. That, to me, was one of the more promising examples. And that's where I could say I actually was supportive of them, because they represented values I could relate to. And I saw with my eyes, I saw with my own eyes, they were doing the things in terms of actually helping people, like materially, addressing healthcare, for example, but also honoring democratic rights to the point of literally, a la George Washington, stepping aside and letting a very different leadership come in.
Let me push back on this a little bit. Did you get blinded in a way and want because if you think about that, I don't want to get too in the weeds here because people get very bored, because I care about this issue a lot. I seem to be the only one that still pays attention to Nicaragua. But the Sandinista government, and whether it's Daniel Ortega or Thomas Borge and these people that really started going after the opposition and La Prensa and these independent things very quickly, there was a woman, very famous quote, this woman Nelba Blandon, who said they were lying about us, saying that we didn't allow freedom of the press, so we had to shut them down, which is a great quote. You can find it, it's out there. But there was that happened. I mean, the election they win. They lower the voting age to 16, and there's a lot of coercion happening there. The things that happened there, if they happened here in New York City, you would say, this is not a kind of democratic way of doing things, saying this paper can't operate, preventing them from having paper supplies to even print the newspaper, et cetera. And there was a lot of question when Violeta Chamorro won that they would hand over the reins of power. So credit to Ortega, but we see Ortega now, who is a different question.
Decades later.
Do you think, and the question is not to relitigate that time, but do you think there's a danger when you see something that on paper is exactly what you want? It's exactly what I think should happen, whether it's literacy programs, healthcare for poor people and subsidized X, Y, and Z, that you might put some blinders on and say, I'm going to kind of ignore this stuff and say, because maybe they'll straighten out in the end, that you probably wouldn't do in the United States.
Well, that's a great question, but I would say let me push back on the frame really quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
You cannot compare a very poor country that had been under dictatorship for generations, and unfortunately also suffered the wrath of U.S. imperialism. You can't say, well, their development is going to be instantaneously everything we want it to be. That said,
not development, no, but freedom.
Yeah, but I'm saying their political development. You can't say, why can't they, if we think we are great, and I would say we are great in many ways, and we have some massive contradictions too, like income inequality, and many other things. You can't say, can't they just be like us? I mean, that's almost like George W. Bush saying he's going to make Iraq into an American-style democracy, within years. It doesn't work that way. Every country has its own history, their own culture, their own reality. But what I found powerful was, and I went to Nicaragua in 1988, I saw...
Hanging out at the Hotel Intercontinental in Managua?
No, I did not. No, much more humble accommodation. I went to the city of Masaya. I went to a health clinic there. And the doctors there explained, they literally put up maps of each neighborhood, and they said, we're going door to door to explain good health practices and find out what each family needs and make sure they come to the clinic and one thing or another. And I thought, what if we could do that in the United States of America? Like, how amazing that they were that hands-on, that focused. That is not the end of the story. But that in a developing country that had been through so much and was so poor was a stunning improvement. And that ultimate decision to honor democracy in 1990 again, it says so much about them that they were searching for a third way. So were they perfect? No. Would I have agreed with everything if I were there? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would have had some vocal disagreements. But in the context of world history, I deeply valued they were trying something new, and it wasn't going to be easy. And they had America breathing down their neck under Reagan with the Contra War and everything else. But they still tried to find that third way. You could say some people within them were less sincere or more sincere, but I'm putting it in global context. We're still looking for that third way.
Yeah.
You know, we're still looking for how to have a democracy that truly serves working people. And I'll always give them credit for trying what I thought was a real and important experiment.
What worries me about the argument is I've heard the same argument from people on the right, and unfortunately this is kind of a popular thing amongst a certain kind of goofy, weird online right now, defending Pinochet, you know, and saying, well, look, you don't understand Chilean political culture, you know, what happened with Allende and the chaos. And look, you had to break a few eggs. You got to make the omelet. We stabilized the economy, but we had to shoot Victor Jara in a soccer stadium. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to me.
And also...
But that's an argument, you see what I'm saying? That's an argument that people say a lot. It's like, it doesn't apply just to the left, it applies to the right, too.
Okay, but let me challenge.
Different culture.
Let me challenge.
Sure.
We could go back to Spain in the 1930s. We can go back to Allende in the 1970s in Chile.
Man, the left, you guys really fucked up Spain in the 1930s, though. Sorry. You're too busy fighting each other to
there's some
forget
truth
about
in that
Franco.
statement. I'm not going to...
listen to Orwell on this.
Yeah. But the point is, go to Guatemala in the 50s. You go across, you know, obviously what happened in Brazil. What's the common link? Democratically elected governments, left-leaning, whatever they were, overthrown by right-wing forces violently. Now, I don't personally know many other examples the other way around of a truly democratic elected government overthrown. You know, it's not like the United States would go in and say...
Not democratically elected, I would say.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Cuban Revolution, 59, and, you know, even Chavez in 92. I mean, that's not even a democratic elected. But there are counter reactions that are violent too, that are revolutionary, et cetera. But
right, yeah. but the pattern, unfortunately, has been when a progressive or socialist government gets elected, duly elected, in a free vote of the people of these different countries, that right-wing forces violently overthrew them, often with the support of the United States of America, which defies our values as Americans. We believe in democracies. You can't have this kind of conditional democracy. It's okay to have democracy unless democracy yields a left-wing government. And so in the end, how could you argue? How could anyone on the right, if they're arguing that Pinochet had a right to overthrow the democratically elected Allende, then they really don't believe in democracy. Just say it. Just say it out loud, guys. If you're fascist and you don't believe in democracy, come clean.
Oh yeah, they do make that argument. They make the argument. I mean, this is not my argument at all. I'm the exact opposite. I argue with these people all the time, where they say, "Hey, look at Pinochet," and I say, you know, you can say whatever you want about Allende. You could say that the Christian Democrats were gaining and that everything was fracturing and people were worried, but you could say the same thing in Iran in 1953. Right? You can make all these things, but let that naturally, which is the same thing that I say about Sandinistas, don't shut the papers down. That's not a local indigenous culture to shut down democracy, shut down papers, to jail dissidents, to shut down television stations, or just not allow them, right? Do not give them licenses for these things. But to get into modern time, particularly because you did your graduate work in Latin American stuff, so much of the stuff we're talking about is so quaint now because you and I are having a discussion about history and the Cold War and why, you know, Cold War powers were using these pawns and reacting the way they did. That's over. And then last week, the United States goes into Caracas, takes no casualties, takes Nicolás Maduro and his wife, and they're about 1.5 miles from us right now.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Just not even just the legality of it. That's a hard argument to make for any of them. I saw a couple of Trump officials trying to make this argument on TV, and it was just a mess of kind of sound bites that didn't make any legal sense. But what do you think of it as somebody who's kind of a veteran of that Latin Cold War style, kind of back? Are you getting a little bit of a flashback there?
Of course. I mean, I heard one of the right-wing commentators argue that this action would make it harder for China to take Taiwan. And I felt the exact opposite. So I'm going to take your question to its logical conclusion.
Yeah.
Putin wanted in the first days of the invasion of Ukraine to get right to Kyiv and take Zelensky.
Yeah.
Exactly. They said, what difference would it be?
Yeah.
If the Russian special forces had achieved their original goal, they would have gotten to the presidential palace, they would have arrested Zelensky.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How is that any different than the United States of America going in under whatever claim and taking a foreign leader? Okay? Now, you could say Zelensky democratically elected 100%,
That's
and you
true.
could question...
Very big difference, yeah.
A very big difference, except
Yeah.
the problem is, you and I both know, the justification, whether it's the United States or any other imperialist power, whether it's China, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, each claiming their own values and saying, oh, that's not a legitimate government, so we're going in and arrest the head of state.
Well, I know you're going to...
And just to finish,
yeah, sure.
For Xi to say, we're just going to go take Taiwan, I would argue he's looking at this situation and saying, great,
Yeah.
we're going to go do the same thing. We're going to fly in, we're going to take out the president of Taiwan, and we'll just come in and take over the country because the U.S. can do it. And so Trump is saying, I'm now in charge of Venezuela. Xi's like, great, I love that. I love that. We'll do the same with Taiwan.
What if it does actually end up being, and there's a wait and see thing. It's not a great...
By the way,
wait and
and
see.
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
sure.
if they do that in Taiwan,
Yeah.
I think one thing that, well, we could talk about all these different issues. If China takes Taiwan,
Yeah.
the entire world changes. Simply because of microchips alone, but so many other
I
issues.
think that's
And so
very true.
the
yeah.
question is,
Yeah.
if we're really playing the long game, and the big question here, did we just enable Chinese imperialism? I believe we did, tragically. I think it was a horrible act by Trump.
If you were to think that the Trump administration is being honest about this, and let's pretend that the state of affairs remains as it is right now, well, when it comes to military. No second strike. I hear this, people talking about a second strike. A second strike on what? I don't really understand what they mean, but it's this kind of threatening noise, second strike. I think Nicolás Maduro I did a couple of shows about this, and I said at the beginning of both of them, I don't want to discuss the legality of this. We get to that in the future. I don't want to discuss the politics of it. I just want to discuss the legacy of Nicolás Maduro, which is a very, very nasty one. And people that I know that he's put in jail, and the ruin that he has overseen in that country. Whether that's our business is a different story. These were just shows about how Venezuelans were feeling about it, particularly Venezuelans in New York. But if they don't do anything more, hey, no casualties from our guys. We just took this guy and his wife away. We're done. It's not an invasion. It's not an occupation. That new, this is the third wave for the Trump people. This is the new way. We're going to, because he talks about Iraq all the time. What a disaster. Iraq was the worst. And, Jeb Bush and all this stuff. How do you maintain that cognitive dissonance there? Well, we're just kind of coming in, doing a thing and leaving. If that were the case, does the comparison of invading and occupying and putting your flag up in Taiwan, does that hold, that comparison hold?
Because first of all, I don't believe for a moment it's going to be this clean, wonderful outcome. It never has been. Could this be the first time in history? Sure, you want to take that bet? Feel free.
Yeah.
It's not going to be. There's literally no situation where our imperialism doesn't yield nasty results, and often a lot of young men and women, young Americans dead in the process. So whatever interesting reasons, there were no casualties here, and I assume there was some kind of inside job that facilitated that.
Seems like, yeah.
And I'm very happy there were no casualties.
Yeah.
But that can't be, it never has been, where this story ends. And the problem I have is, now it's open season. Now we have taken American values, which were supposed to favor respect for sovereignty, and we have made a mockery of them. By the way, the U.S. has happily supported how much money do we give to Egypt? I don't think you would call Sisi a democratically elected leader.
I think the second largest recipient of American
correct.
foreign aid.
So the point is,
that's a bribe for Israel.
Yeah, but let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
We have supported, as a country, this country has supported dictatorships in the post-World War II era, has merrily supported, not just look the other way, intensely supported and financed dictatorships all over the world. So why suddenly is this dictatorship the one where we're going to go in and arrest the leader?
Jean Kirkpatrick, the dictatorships and double standards. You remember her essay on that?
Yeah. So now let's take it the next step. Unlike the past, we've now established the notion that it's okay to go in and take a foreign leader and overthrow a sovereign government. Well, again, that's what Putin was trying to do in Ukraine. That's what Xi wants to do in Taiwan. So to the extent we had any high ground, we've blown a lot of that. We've alienated a whole lot of people in Latin America. And we think right now, because Trump's like, everything's going to be beautiful. He always says everything's going to be beautiful. But how many times has that actually worked out? Rarely. So to me, the fundamental point here is we have created a whole new danger, which honestly goes against some of the more interesting things the America First movement was talking about. There was an element in the America First world that a lot of people on the left should feel comfortable with that was saying, let's end the imperialism and focus on our needs at home. Trump actually said a fair amount of that. He said, we can't do nation building. We can't do regime change. He's got many, many quotes in that vein. He's now created a reality where a huge amount, I mean, just the money on this operation alone, okay, he says he's going to get oil money back. We'll see about that.
Yeah.
The amount we have spent already on Venezuela that could have been spent at home. So he's done exactly what he said his predecessors did wrong. And he's created a horrible precedent and a dangerous precedent.
Well, his idea is that if there's no quagmire, if there's no Vietnam/Iraq/ more importantly, Afghanistan, which was a 25-year loss
Longest
of the war, then it's okay. Like the one small thing that I would dispute is that the idea that there's some sort of legal basis for this, I think, is almost cartoonishly wrong.
Right.
And you can like the results, as I do, because I really despise this person. But then when I step back into the real world and say, okay, is this something that we should be doing as precedent?
Right.
No. I mean, there's obviously precedent in Grenada, in Panama, and a million other things, but are they great precedents
No.
to want to, you don't have to be a Maurice Bishop fan to be like, I'm maybe not this smart. But at the same time, I would say, this is the small, I won't say correction, but just disagreement. I don't believe it's a sovereign government. It doesn't mean that we can do whatever the hell we want to it, but it is an illegitimate government that stole an election.
Okay, hold on. How many governments on the earth, 220 nations on the earth, whatever?
Yeah.
I'd love to see your scorecard. Again, would you agree by the same standard, Egypt is not a sovereign government, if you call it that? But
yes, of course.
But your nation is giving them untold tens of billions all the time.
This is not, you can't accuse me of hypocrisy there, because I agree with you on this. I just say that, the idea that there's a reason that you say every time when you talk about Allende, when you talk about Spain, that you say democratically elected government. There's an importance to that. And so I think there's a blurring of sovereign that sometimes people think that that's either a synonym or something that it's not a sovereign nation in that way.
Can we separate 2 points? Very fair concern. Democratically elected is one thing. And again, the United States, and I love my nation, but I hate this history of overthrowing democratically elected governments in Latin America. It's a horrible, painful history. But the second question is sovereignty, just nation states. It's very much the question we're having in Ukraine right now. Yeah. Does it matter? I think there was a huge mistake in 2014 to let Russia get as far as they got, effectively with limited sanction. Once you say national borders are no longer sacrosanct, and that sense of sovereignty, I do think one of the, I wouldn't call it an accomplishment, but one of the clarities of the post-World War II world has been we have these borders and they're generally recognized, and it has been a reason for people not to think they can constantly go to war. Yeah. Nation states, beyond that, a lot of issues, a lot of problems with the concept of the nation state, the way they've been structured. But what I'm saying to you is, if we put aside the question of who is democratically elected versus who is not, and we just say, okay, we do recognize there are these nations in the world, we know their borders, we know what their form of government is. Now, once you say, I can actually, as I'm China, I'm Iran, I'm Russia, I'm the United States of America, I can go in anytime I want and take out any leader I want for whatever reason I come up with. Yeah. You've created global chaos beyond that. We think we got chaos now?
Yeah, no.
That's real chaos. So my problem is, okay, someone could say, I don't like Maduro, he's not democratically elected. Then the next thing is, what if someone calls up and says, let's take out the leader of Egypt, let's take out the leader of Chad, whatever it is. Yeah. Where does this end?
No, it's a very bad precedent. But on the issue of sovereignty, I mean, in 1938, let's say June 1939, is Nazi Germany a sovereign nation? That with these borders that are meaningful in the sense that even after the Czech crisis in 1938, that was negotiated with the West. What Gdansk was going to be was negotiated with the West. It's like Hong Kong was negotiated with the West, and they abrogated all their responsibilities for democracy in Hong Kong. Like, is that something that applies in June of 1939 to Nazi Germany too? That's a sovereign nation.
No, you're making the argument perfectly. All those quote-unquote negotiations that gave up the rights of people and gave up democracy and left people for dead, those were not honest negotiations.
No.
If you say, in 1938, let's say, here are the German borders, they exist as a country, we're not saying there isn't a German nation, fine. If the German nation had stayed inside the German nation, we're not having this conversation, right? It's a whole different world. So I think the fundamental question is, until we get to a more enlightened world, a more democratic world, a world in which nation states are more actually responsible and accountable to their people. If we say, you guess with me, are 60% of the world's nations dictatorships right now? I don't know what the number is.
The number's gone up, unfortunately.
Right. So I would argue more.
We had a golden age where it was down, and that now it's up to a unfortunate place.
Right. I'm going to guess more than 50% of the world's nations, you and I would both qualify as dictatorships. Okay. And maybe I'm just taking that in broad stroke.
Yeah.
If that's our reality, if that's the painful reality of the world, if we're still not where we need to be, the notion of going and arresting a national leader creates so many negative realities. And by the way, this is before American men and women have died in the operation. This is this weird moment where it's been so wonderfully surgical, and he says, we're going to take their oil money and everything. Again, I've never seen something so neat in global history. Like, just wait a few minutes. Let's see where this goes.
Especially Latin America. Come on.
Right. So, exactly. Yeah. So, I think, look, I don't think the American people have any appetite to lose our service members in other parts of the world at this point. And by the way, I think that's growth on the part of the American people. I think after Vietnam, after Iraq, people have come to very powerful conclusions that we should not be an imperialist nation, that we have to deal with our problems at home. In fact, unfortunately, the nation building used to happen here, now has to happen here again. But
were you surprised, by the way, as a Latin American, specialist, you did your graduate work on this, is that there was a poll that I saw out this morning and checked it. This is a reliable poll. It's not some sort of internet thing, of Latin American countries. And there wasn't a single country over 50% objecting to what happened to Maduro. The highest number was Mexico, actually, and that makes a certain amount of sense with the proximity to the United States and
the history,
and how Trump has been threatening Mexico. There was Costa Rica, the only country in Central America that never had a Marxist, rebel movement, and I think it was like almost 80% that said we support this. I mean, it's a kind of interesting thing because what it gets you to me and to your point, which is, does a big nation that has the resources, that has the military might, and does it so spectacularly? I mean, sold out by somebody in the inner circle or not, that's a pretty impressive operation, just objectively, not in any politics. Is there a point that a big nation has an obligation to a country that is not their own, that has sovereign borders, when, say, Rwanda is happening? Where is that line for Bill de Blasio?
Genocide, which is obviously such a tricky topic, but I don't think anyone would disagree it was happening in Rwanda.
Oh, yes.
Right?
In the most brutal way, too.
Right. To me, that's a place the United States should have intervened with other nations as well in a joint effort.
But even that's hard because getting everybody on board and the UN and all the problems
it's incredibly hard.
When time is of the essence, do you do something about it quickly?
Yes.
To help, but unilaterally?
Look,
you might lose soldiers. That's the difficulty. I mean, you wanted to be president. That is the type of thing that the president has to deal with, right? Mr. President, here is 100,000 dead children hacked to death with hand tools in Rwanda. We can't get the international community on board. We have people in Djibouti. We'll get them out there within 6 hours, and we can stop this. And that's on you. And people might die.
Yeah, and let's also be honest. In today's technological reality, with drones and precision strikes, you probably, even then, when Rwanda happened, you probably could have done a lot to stop what was happening without putting a lot of American lives in danger.
I know that, the technology is both a blessing and a curse.
Correct.
It might be a blessing,
No, it is. Sure. But in this case, even in the several years ago, I think it would have been possible to go there and do something with minimal exposure that would have at least disrupted the horrible momentum of genocide.
Yeah.
But thank God there are very few Rwandas to point to. If you talk about nations where folks are being oppressed, which is much of the world, and again, this is where we got to be honest.
Yeah.
What are we saying here? Are we saying if it's not a democratic government, we have a right to go in anytime we want? Are we saying if there's a lot of poor people, we have a right to go in because so many people are poor? That there's no way to argue that when we have been supporting as a nation those very governments that impoverish their own people.
I said to somebody last night that I'd interviewed a Venezuelan, and she agreed with me. I said, Donald Trump does not give a shit about Venezuelans.
Yeah.
I could care less. I don't even think he understands the oil thing, to be honest, and how difficult the heavy crude in the Orinoco Basin is, but that'll catch up with him. But that, it is democracy. I also want to say that the Soviet Union was spreading itself very wide and not necessarily in response to the United States, like South Yemen and places like this.
Yep.
So that kind of battlefield was a different thing than it is now. But as I don't want to run out of time here to get home, because you're a guy that I see you and I hear you in interviews and I'm like, this is a guy that wants to talk about foreign policy. That's kind of his experience. But he was also the 2-term mayor of New York City.
Crazy, isn't it?
It is insane.
In America, anything can happen.
Yeah, in America, anything can happen. This Italian guy from Cambridge can become the mayor of New York City. Looking back on that experience, I mean, you're up on the dais there with our new mayor.
Yeah.
Who I know you've been supportive of,
Yes.
and I'm sure that I'm sure that your phone is ringing from him like, all right, what am I going to expect? What are you telling him when he says, you're walking to this viper's nest, whether it's the police departments, the unions, the New York Post, whatever it is, everyone's out to get you. What do you tell him?
Well, I don't talk about what I tell him, first of all.
Yeah, of course.
But
would you tell him?
No, I'll just tell you my broad view.
Yeah.
It's one of the most amazing jobs in the world. This is not being cheesy here. It's incredible privilege to hold that job. It also really sucks a lot of the time. It's really tough. And
did you hate it?
No, I did. I had an absolutely bifocal reality. I loved the work. I loved the team.
Yeah.
I loved the neighborhoods and the people. I hated the endless conflict. I hated how much pain there was, honestly. I mean, 8.5 million people, there's a lot of pain you deal with every day. If you have empathy, and he certainly does, to his credit, one of the big challenges is how you process all that pain. I mean, you're every single day. He went to the site of a horrible fire the other day. God forbid if one of our members of public service is killed in action. Those are very painful, difficult moments. I always said, I had to go oftentimes to the hospital when we lost a firefighter or a police officer. And those families were devastated. And seeing that pain was incredibly difficult. They were going through 1,000 times more than I would ever go through. But if you go time after time after time to the hospital, to the fire, if you see people who are going through so much, you go and talk to homeless people, whatever it is, you're constantly surrounded by pain and difficulty. Now, at the same time, it's the most magical place on earth. I mean, it's a beautiful, amazing place. But that balance is hard to navigate. I think, to his great credit, he is a happy warrior, if ever I've seen one. He is a truly happy warrior. He is a wonderfully self-possessed guy. He's very comfortable in his own skin. I think that helps a lot. But, people would always ask me, how do you make sense of the job? And my sort of flipped response, but also true, is I said, it's the same as they say about mountain climbing. Don't look down. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't think about the individual pain and challenges of 8.5 million people all day long and stay sane. You have to have a North Star of here's where we're trying to go.
It's a very interesting point, and it's one that I think about a lot. And I say this, I mean, you and I probably have very, very deep disagreements on just sort of basic policy stuff. When I'm one of those cranky, kind of libertarian types, but I hate libertarians. I can't stand them.
Well, that makes you a perfect libertarian.
Yeah, I can't stand the other ones.
That's right.
But it's inflected, and in things, and my views have changed and a bunch of stuff. But I'm sure we differ a lot. But that's less interesting to me than that kind of idea that don't look down. This is an amazing emotional strain when you're doing these things, like one long funeral of all the tragedies that happen in this city that you have to attend to. But there is a type of person. You threw your hat into the presidential ring.
Yeah.
That's a type of person.
Yeah.
You want that, ability. I think it's wrong to say want that. You want that ability to affect change, whatever it might be. What is that in you?
I
wants to do that.
As an intense sports fan.
Yeah.
Some people don't like sports analogies, but I'll use this one.
I violate that. I do them all the time. Yeah,
I'll use the baseball analogy. I want the ball hit to me.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's a certain personality type, for whatever reason, that wants to be the decision maker, that wants the responsibility, that can't abide seeing all the problems, all the pain, and not doing something about it. I think one of the things that's interesting, because bring it back to upbringing, something about my parents' experience and just a life I came up in told me I had agency.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I would look, and this is just a weird sort of development. I don't even know how it quite happened, but like I never thought, I can't do something about that. Whether it was the United States role in the world or whether it was income inequality or whatever it was, I always thought I can personally do something about that.
That's an incredible instinct.
And it's not megalomania, thank God, because
I was going to ask you, are you a narcissist?
I hope not, and I don't think so. I think it is an understanding of I can do something, not I can do everything.
Sure.
I can do something.
But to be the president, to be the mayor, you have to be able to do a lot, right? I have to play all. You want to do a sports analogy. Michael Jordan thought he could play for the White Sox too.
Yeah.
Like, you're that guy. Like, I can do all this stuff. I have the ideas. I've figured this out. I think I know the solution to that stuff. And let me ask you the other question. On the other end of 2 terms as mayor, Bill, I mean, income inequality, you ran on that.
Yeah.
Look at this fucking city now. And that Zoran's running on that, and he's winning on that. You couldn't solve that.
Well, hold on. The city independent budget office, which was quite independent, I assure you, did an analysis at the end of my administration. And the question was not, did we quote unquote solve it? The question was, did we bend the curve? Did we start moving things in the right direction? We did pre-K for all, which put a lot of money back in people's pockets, in addition to helping kids. And 3K for all. We did paid sick leave. We did a lot with union contracts to improve the standard of working people. We went a whole host of things. Obviously, $15 minimum wage, worked for higher taxes on the wealthy. In the end, the independent budget office said we actually did bend the curve. We actually changed things from the policies of Bloomberg and started to reduce income inequality. Now, could I control, God help us, a pandemic and the wealth that accrued to the 1% in the pandemic, which is a painful story unto itself? No, I'm not. I think we have so much work to do to try and bring a little more equality, to try and get back, ironically, to the time of Dwight Eisenhower, when we had much more shared prosperity and much higher taxes on the wealthy. We have tons of work to do. But to your point, I thought I could do something, and I did do something. I mean, people are very kind about pre-K for all. And
you think that's your kind of signal achievement?
Absolutely, and I'm very proud of it. But what I'm proud about, it was first and foremost motivated by feeling for kids and my own children's experience. But it was also about trying to level the playing field more and give every kid the same start and every opportunity. My point in that is that solving income inequality? No. Is that actually tangibly moving the needle and giving, and there's been about 500,000 kids who got pre-K for all since we put it in 10 years ago. That, when you can change 500,000 lives for the better, that's not the same thing as, megalomania or narcissism or thinking you can solve everything. It's, can you start something? Can you inspire bigger change? Can you credentialed a huge number of young leaders who are now going to serve the Mamdani administration? We gave a lot of them their start. We gave them a lot of them the elevation that they could go on to higher roles. It's about contributing. So from my point of view, I hope this kind of personality type, I certainly see this in Mamdani, is grounded in understanding the magnitude of the challenge. But we are part of, and I'm sorry to be poetic here, we're part of a 200-year tradition of progressive people, the labor movement, the left-wing movements all around the United States and around the world, trying to create a more equal and fair society. And every generation passes off to the next generation. Every leader passes off to the next leader. I'm just ecstatic watching Mamdani. I could do some things. I think he'll be able to do more. And that's the idea. We're in a relay here. We pass the baton to the next person to run the next leg. And so I think that's the healthy way to look at it, to have a sense of agency, to have a sense of impact,
Yeah.
but understand you're part of a much, much bigger multi-generational puzzle.
As someone who's not a progressive, and if somebody said, hey, I'm going to hire you to give progressives some advice on certain things, one of the things that I would say was to be careful about making, look, I agree that you did the pre-K stuff, and that remains, and that's an achievement.
And it was universal for all people, all backgrounds.
Yes, and so when I hear Mamdani making promises about rents, I think that's dangerous. And I don't think it's dangerous in the Milton Friedman way, that this is bad economics. I think it's dangerous because it's not going to work. And what it does for progressives, and I say this as this is me in my role that no one would ever want me to do, to advising progressives politically. I say the same thing to the Trump people, is that the MAGA types are like, oh, these tariffs are going to bring factories back. No, they're not. And guess what? Someone's going to notice that sometime.
By the way, they were going to end the Ukraine war on the first day.
First day. It was like, you make these promises, and it's not even about if those promises materially affect somebody. It doesn't materially affect somebody in Kansas if the Ukraine war doesn't end on the first day. But there's an accumulation of this stuff that when it doesn't happen, particularly in a very educated place like New York, which has become more educated and more wealthy over time.
The whole country has.
The whole country, which is a great thing.
This is the most educated generation in history right now.
But when you say, like, I just see the people with the freeze the rent signs in their brownstones where you and I live that cost $3 million. And I'm like, it's not even the economics of it, which I think are crazy, but it's the idea that this is going to materially create more opportunities for people to get cheaper apartments is, to me, lunacy. But my thing about that is not to debate that policy with you, because you and I disagree on this, and that's boring. But it's that, what do you think is for progressives when you make big promises like this and they don't happen? Because the thing about it is New York has had liberals, David Dinkins, who you knew, you worked with. Yeah. He wasn't a progressive in the sense that Zoran was. You were kind of I think that you were kind of the starter kit for him, because you were very much a progressive, but it was kind of tempered by, the politics of the time and everything. Zoran's going in, hard. He's like, I'm going to rule and govern as a progressive. Of course, he's going to be hobbled by Albany, hobbled by the governor, as all this stuff that you have to deal with. But don't you worry that progressives are going to overpromise and then it's going to hurt the movement?
Well, I'll answer you, but with a preface.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
The MAGA movement is one form of evolution, but before
towards progressivism in some ways, by the way.
Well, in a funny way.
Yeah.
But the same pattern was happening on the left with the Bernie Sanders campaigns.
Yeah.
And, I came along in 2013, and Bernie came along in 2015 and 2016, and before me was Occupy Wall Street. I mean, there's been a series of things that have been adding up, but Bernie's really the seismic piece in this. You have a reality now that I think Mamdani is taking what the Bernie movement started and trying to build upon it. And he's trying to build a new politics, which is audacious, but absolutely appropriate after we've seen for the last decade the left evolve in America and the right evolve in America. So this notion of like, oh, we're static. I mean, I know you don't think that, but I'm saying, but I'm to frame and then to get to your answer. I think the big reality here is a recognition that we're in an incredibly fertile time, a time of big change and big realignment. And that's what's driving some of his action, because he sees it as a way to set up much bigger change ultimately. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And he has the ability and the moment to grab. To the question of raising expectation, I said we were going to do pre-K for all. People, many observers thought it was preposterous. I said we would create or finance 200,000 affordable apartments. People told me it was insane. We did these things. He's going to do these things in one form or another. The fast and free buses, by definition, is going to take time, but it is a viable policy. It exists in different places around the world, even around the United States. It can happen over time.
No one pays for buses now anyway. So
well, not entirely true, but
come on, it's true.
No, it's not true. Come on. I take the subway all the time and the buses all the time, and people, a huge percentage of people.
No one pays at my stop.
Okay, well then
I'm totally
stop.
Serious. Yeah,
you have
totally
a reckless.
I have a reckless. The Utica stop is a bit reckless.
You're anarchistic stop.
Anarchist. This is like the Lysander
this is your libertarian influence on your stop.
I'm an anarcho-capitalist at this point.
But no, the reality is a whole lot of people do pay for their mass transit in New York City, and incrementally creating freer buses or free buses in different places is going to work, I believe, and people will see it over time. He can freeze the rent. I freeze the rent for the rent-stabilized tenants several times. He can do it. Is it a panacea? No. Does it help people in the short term? Yes. He can make real progress on universal childcare because we started it with pre-K and 3K, and there's a lot that can be done to complete what we started and then go the next step. And I think actually he's got a state legislature and a governor who are willing to go part of the way with him. It's not going to happen overnight, but he can do something. The most interesting one to me in some ways is, the public grocery stores, which have been derided by the right as like Stalinist, and it's a total misunderstanding of what they are. You've got food deserts all over this city and all over American cities in general where people can't get quality food and they can't get affordable food. So if I say to you, well, the government currently is involved in national defense, it's involved in policing, it's involved in education, it's involved in transportation, it's involved in healthcare, why on earth couldn't it also be involved in helping make sure that people get food?
We don't have enough time to episode for me to respond to that.
No, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm saying if you've got a food desert, and we've tried to incentivize, private sector actors in the grocery world to come in to those neighborhoods. Generally hasn't worked. So you do some public groceries to get people food. It's not a giveaway. People are still paying for it. Why not try it? What is so horrible about trying it? Once upon a time, I'm sure people were like, what? Public education? Or what? Public subways being paid for by the government? All of these things had to go through their evolution. But I would love to see places, if you're a struggling working class family or poor family, you can't get decent fruits and vegetables and your kids aren't healthy.
Of course you can. Come on, that's bullshit.
No, it's not bullshit. It's not. Michael?
Okay, you're a Brooklyn guy. You know the Mr. chains, Mr. Mango, Korean businesses. They get fruit that is like on its last. You can't put them in regular grocery stores, and it's the cheapest thing in the world. You can get them all over Brooklyn. It's an absolute myth that you can't get good fruits and vegetables. The problem is that people don't want that. That's a problem, is kind of programming people to get away from junk food and fast food and things like that. But it's a low margin business, Bill. You know that.
It's a low margin business.
By the way, isn't
and what is mass
Marty
transit?
Supreme because he's a bazillionaire for grocery stores.
What is mass transit? It's not only a low margin business, it's a losing business, which is why the public sector has to get involved.
Where does it stop that everything is a public good? That's
when the private sector can get the thing done. God bless America.
They get the thing done.
They don't. No.
Of course
the food
they do.
deserts are real.
In New York City, there's not a food desert.
Okay.
You can't take one stop. I go 10 stops.
I challenge you. Let's bring in some food experts and have that conversation.
Oh,
I believe
experts.
No, I'm
Bill's
serious.
Experts.
You can bring your own. I believe.
I'm the expert. I go to the grocery store.
Okay, you're not. No, sorry, my brother. I have spent so much time in communities of my city for years, and there are food deserts. And we do not have what people need, which is supermarkets that provide affordable quality produce, because that's what's going to help keep kids be safe.
The problem
is
why is the rent so fucking high for the people to get these buildings? If the margin is 1% and the stuff is so expensive, the problem is not the grocery store. What is the problem then? Why is the stuff so expensive if the margin is 1.5%?
The point.
It's expensive to operate a business in New York City.
Yes, it is.
Right?
And there's more than one way to solve that. And I don't think it's a mutually exclusive point. I very much believe, as does Mamdani, there are some regulations we should get rid of. There's ways we can support smaller businesses.
Did you say regulations we should get rid of?
I did. I've always believed
Blasio
that. No, I've said it
really?
publicly before. Yeah. And we did some of that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, by the way, Mamdani supports a lot of the changes that one might say are pro quote unquote abundance to speed up the production of housing. We did a bunch of that. We did a bunch of rezonings to create more housing.
What do you think about that whole debate?
But to finish this point, I'm sorry, really quick. I think what I would argue to you is there have been sincere efforts by the city and state for years to try and support private sector supermarkets coming into neighborhoods that needed them, and it's been a very unfortunate history. Therefore, that's a context to try a public solution. It's not creeping socialism. It's just solve the problem. If you say, oh, wait, I've got another way to solve the problem for the same money or less, fine.
If Walmart said, I want to open a grocery store in this empty spot on between 32nd and 33rd Street, would your administration, Zoran's administration, say no to that? Because there's no Walmarts in the city and in Brooklyn. They're out in Long Island. That's the cheapest place I've ever been to buy anything in my life. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
And I'm not going to lie to you. I think, first of all, there are other types of chains that do some of the same stuff.
Sure.
I think Walmart's particular history in terms of labor, in terms of environment, in terms of China. I have a bunch of issues with Walmart that make them particular to me, not speaking for anyone else. But to the bigger question, if whichever, Costco,
but
whoever.
they could solve it and we know it works.
Well, but
right?
I'm being very personal here and saying,
Yeah.
let's use a different example. If Costco
I just
or
gave
whoever
you a
else,
good solution.
I'm giving
You're like, I don't like
I'm
that.
saying that, well,
Yeah.
I have my particular reasons I don't like. I'm not going to,
But we're talking about you. We're talking
can
about
I
poor
say,
people.
I'm not going to bullshit you. Can I say that?
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. But we're talking about poor people. We're not talking about
Again,
you, right?
I am arguing to you.
Yeah.
If you say I've got a private sector solution, let's just take a generic private sector solution. Of course I'd be open to it. I worked with the private sector all the time to find solutions to problems, and we had many successes. You go to 42nd Street, huge tower next to Grand Central Station, TD Bank. We gave them the right to build much bigger than was originally allowable because they also helped us to fix all the subway stations in the area.
Yeah,
Everyone
it's sort
won.
of abundance thing about
Everyone
the government, you know. And do you think, this is the final question, because I've kept you too long, but in this kind of debate now, because the question I wanted to ask you is this applicable, like this type of progressivism, is it applicable to other parts of the country that are not urban centers with highly educated people that went to Bryn Mawr and all this stuff?
100%.
Is that across the board? And I think there's some evidence to suggest that when you say 100%, that might be right, considering that there's so many in the MAGA coalition, the Josh Hawleys of the world, who have gone to a much more progressive economic outlook. But what do you think about that debate within left politics, liberal politics, of the Ezra Klein kind of abundance? We need to get out of the way and let people build. And when we let people build, the prices will go down, et cetera, versus kind of older, not older, more progressive, just sort of a, basic progressive idea that Zoran and maybe you would represent. Do you think there's some space for both of those ideas?
Uniting the 2 points.
Yeah.
Look around the country where there were referenda on minimum wage, and look how many red states voted to raise minimum wage.
Yeah.
There is such space for progressive economic populism all over this country, rural, urban, red state, blue state. There's a massive opening. If Democrats have half a brain in this next midterm election, they will emulate a lot of what Mamdani has talked about in each their own language, in their own place, but focus on healthcare, focus on kitchen table, focus on prices, and you can win. Yeah. And that's what Democrats have done historically.
Yeah, sort of New Deal style.
Correct. Politics. And we drifted, too many in our party drifted towards moderation and elitism and, a focus on social issues over economic issues. Bernie, I think, showed us a lot about how to get back to the core and win people in all sorts of places. To the abundance question, I think it's a both and. I think there are elements of the abundance argument that make sense. Of course, when you don't need regulation or when you can do things to foster more housing creation, there's a lot of sense in that. But it's not the end of the story, because that will not create enough housing for working people. The reality is, if you free up the market more, I've talked to plenty of developers. We did a lot. We did rezonings. We did all sorts of things to make it possible to create more housing. Of course they wanted to go for the high end first. I understand that. They got a bottom line to think about. We would bargain very aggressively and say, you only get to your high end if we get a bunch of affordable housing back in the deal. So the state...
And they get like tax breaks and things too,
yes,
right?
and zoning allowances.
Yeah, sure.
So the point is, if abundance reduces down to just like let 1,000 flowers bloom and no regulation, everything's going to be great, no, that's not true. It has to be a combination of freeing up the market in some ways, but also understanding the only way you create enough affordable housing in the United States of America is with a government role. That's true with the FHA historically. That's true with Section 8, which was actually a Republican-liked idea for many years to provide rental assistance so people could go out to the private market.
As was UBI.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I'm saying the fact is, let's not delude ourselves. Help the private sector to do what it does well, drive a hard bargain in the process, but also there has to be a government role sparking maximum housing development for working class people and or subsidizing working class people to be able to afford housing. I've been all over the country. There's a affordable housing crisis in Montana, for God's sakes. I mean, it's not just an urban thing, but the notion that the private sector will produce enough on its own, there's no precedent for that. Not today. Maybe in the post-war era that was true, but not today.
I need to get you back because we have so much to talk about, and I've enjoyed this immensely. And to any of you who criticize, why didn't you ask him about this? Why didn't you say this? It's like, you watch the show to hear the people talk, and we go back and forth. I think absolute pleasure.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Bill de Blasio. In the next episode, we're going to do Bill's Make New York Sandinista again. I think that was your quote. Wasn't that you? You had that T-shirt?
No, I had the
the hat.
the red
Yeah,
cap.
it's a red cap.
Yeah, by the way,
halfway there.
Here's our next topic needs to be, how did red become the right-wing color?
That's so strange.
Someone explain that to me.
Yeah, in European politics, they say it's a red coalition or a brown coalition because of the Nazis and everything. But Mayor Bill de Blasio, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Michael. Pleasure.
And we'll be back next Tuesday. Go over to the YouTube channel at the Moynihan Report and subscribe and watch all the clips and send the great interview with Bill de Blasio to all of your pals. Bye.